Well, good afternoon and welcome to our next podcast. We are absolutely thrilled and honored today to have Mr. Brian Weaver. Brian is the CEO of Torch.AI in Kansas City. He is a world-renowned athlete in the Ironman competitions, and we'll get him to talk a little bit about that and how that helps when you're at the top of the food chain, like he is as a CEO, how that helps ground you. He's also an adamant gardener, and so that's also important about balance of life. I mean, he does tremendous things in the world of artificial intelligence. And so recently, he and I went to Fort Leavenworth, and I was just absolutely amazed at how the students just gravitated to hear more and more about not just AI, but getting into AI as an entrepreneur and figuring out what are the best practices, how do you do it well, and how is this going to affect all of us in the future. So with all that said, Brian, welcome to our podcast, and please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, thank you very much for having me, and it's exciting to be here, and especially a great opportunity for us to kind of build on what we did together up at Fort Leavenworth a couple of weeks ago. Look, I'm a pretty prototypical Type A, hard driving entrepreneur. I think at the end of the day, right? I think maybe the only claim to fame I have is some resilience. Hard to kill me. I've been doing this, almost 30 years now. I've had owned, bought, sold dozens of companies, and I'm really, really fortunate today to be the founder, CEO, and chairman of the board of an artificial intelligence company that serves the federal government and helps evolve and enhance our country's national security posture. So it's a pretty special thing for me in my life. But I'm excited to talk to you today and share a little bit about what I've learned with your audience. Yeah.
Appreciate it, Brian. I tell you, let's unpack that a little bit. So you've bought, sold many companies. Compared to me, you're not very old, and so one would argue you've done that at a very formative time of your life growing up. But first off, how did you gravitate to AI? How did you go, wow, AI is the future, and all these other things are just the means to the end to get there?
Yeah, I mean, my joke here is that we were doing AI before AI was cool. I mean, we've been building artificial intelligence capabilities for over 10 years now here at Torch with the team. I, as an entrepreneur, was always fascinated with data, and I was always a creative type. And, I really enjoyed understanding what a customer's problems were. So, for whatever reason, I've always been somebody that really, really enjoyed having deep relationships with people and companies and customers like that. And sort of I would gravitate towards people that had real hard problems to solve. And then just my natural proclivity around data and mathematics and things like that. Like my very, very first company, I was doing sort of human behavioral modeling for sports fans all over the US. And it grew in a really fun way. But I was, at the time, instead of using AI and algorithms and machine learning and all that other stuff, we didn't call it any of those words. I was using actuaries from a large employer called T-Mobile here in Kansas City. And I hired these ladies that would do modeling around like phone accessories and all this other kind of stuff. And I said, I could use the same kind of idea and predict what a human was about to do. And in the context of a sports fan or selling a season ticket or, like a live event, it became really, really unique. And again, I was enamored with that because the customer had a problem, but I could solve the problem in a way that they weren't even really thinking about. Like it wasn't a possibility for them to use data and create leverage with data. You just had to have the right mathematics. And so now, 20 years later, what are we doing? Well, shoot, we do, these all kinds of really, really amazing, generative AI, not text necessarily, but other forms of very, very sophisticated cutting edge AI, but it's all to make predictions or what we would call inferences today better, faster, stronger, right? And so anyway, it's just a tool. But I was always just personally, just fascinated and curious about, hard problems like that. I always gravitated towards things like that. I don't know if I got a screw loose or just like puzzles or whatever. But it's gotten me in trouble. Not everything I've done has been financially successful, but a lot of it has. But I found that there is that common thread. Looking backwards, it's easy to see the path. Looking forward, sometimes not so easy. But that's sort of been the link across all these adventures that I've had in my life.
How does somebody, for somebody in our audience who's sitting there going, I want to be Brian Weaver when I grow up, and I'm in
Mm,
college, and you went to Northwest. I want to put a plug in for our alma mater. We
yeah,
went to the same school. Now,
great
I didn't
school.
know anybody who was good in mathematics, like you just described, actually went to Northwest. I would assume you were an MIT grad of some sort, but you went to Northwest, and I completely respect that. But here you are, you're at Maryville and your senior year. How does somebody just suddenly go, I'm going to be an entrepreneur?
Mm,
Or what was the actual path? Did you have to do something to get there, or did you just
mm.
jump right in?
Yeah, it's a funny question and a hilarious story. I actually got in trouble at work, and it really upset me. I mean, so look, I was one of the guys or people that was entrepreneurial as a kid. I had a lawn mowing business, and I was really into photography and being creative. And so, in order to afford I mean, this is years
A
and years
long
ago.
time
So
ago.
I was spending thousands of dollars on photography equipment because I was really enamored with that, the complexity of that, and it's problem solving in a way, and it's creative, it's complex, mechanical. And so anyway, I was into that. So in order to afford that, I needed to go, and I also like ride bikes at the time. And so, in order to afford that, I mowed lawns, and I had a business, and I started learning how to make money early on. The first job I ever had, I broke a window in my parents' house and I needed to pay for it and I had no money. And so they made me go get a job. So that was out of necessity. And then the rest of it's out of sort of desire. But I've always had the kind of a good work ethic. Even in, you mentioned Ironman stuff before. I think, one of the reasons I excelled at Ironman is I just have a good work ethic. I like to work. And that gives me pleasure. But I think, I've always been interested in not necessarily working for myself. That's not how it started. I started out with a job just like everybody else, but I was always entrepreneurial in those jobs. So the first two jobs I had, the first job I had, I worked for a Disney subsidiary, and I was entrepreneurial there. And I tried to start little, divisions inside that thing. And, when you're in a big company, that doesn't always jive, right? A big company needs to have consistency and predictability, and entrepreneurs don't necessarily create either of those two things natively. And the next company I worked for, I ended up literally getting in trouble. I started this, again, sports fan idea. Um, and it didn't sit well with the executives, the C-suite folks that I reported up to. And I got written up and I got in trouble for it. And it crushed me. I couldn't believe I'd done a good job. I cared for the company. I had the priorities straight. Um, but it just didn't align with what their vision was, and that's okay. No harm, no foul. But I knew that it was time for me to kind of move on. And honestly, I tried to go work for, one of the customers that I thought would be a good fit for this,
Yeah.
and that just didn't work out. And so I then saw very quickly that maybe the only way to make this work is for me to start a company. And so I had that frank and earnest conversation, and the customer was like, "Well, sure, I'll do that. I'll give you a shot." And so I quit my job. I ran up a massive credit card bill, buying all kinds of computers and supplies and all kinds of stuff I needed to survive. And then I, started the company. And that decision was kind of an interesting one. And I think most people, and maybe the audience of this podcast would maybe agree, they're sort of afraid to take the first step.
Mm-hmm.
One, I've got an amazing wife, and she's always been supportive even back then. She helps me think through problems in a very structured way, I think, and that's a great partnership for me professionally. But at the same time, I sort of came to the realization that if I just thought about what's the worst case scenario, I'm like, look, worst case scenario is I'm that guy that sells aloe vera on the beach. When you go on a vacation, he comes up and bugs you with a plastic bag and he says, "Give me $10 for this aloe vera." Like, that's the worst case scenario. And you
Yeah.
know what? That's a hell of a life. And so I just said, I can handle the worst case. I don't have anything to lose, because worst case, I get rid of all of my attachments, which are abstract BS things anyway. And I'll just go have the best life living on the beach and selling aloe vera and talking to people. And I'll be the best aloe vera salesman that anybody's ever thought of. And so once you sort of get beyond this fear,
Yeah.
you realize that you have this freedom. Most people don't put enough attention on understanding what really drives them, their jewel, their special thing that they really have to have. Most people don't have that introspection. And so I got lucky that I did that in my 20s. And it's created the freedom that I enjoy today. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. That's the conversation we normally have. And a lot of people call it tear the Band-Aid off. Eventually,
Yeah.
like, you quit the W-2 job and you just go all in, just take the plunge. And like you said, live with the worst case scenario, but aspire to the best case scenario. So
Yeah.
good. So in essence, you're a self-made man. You didn't have somebody give you a small loan of $1 million like other people, and
No. Yeah.
you've built to where you're at. So, most guys that where you're at. I have my Hughesisms. What are your Weaverisms? Do you have Weaverisms
Ah,
to share with the group?
I do. Um, so I am a very creative person that thinks very, very quickly. And often I can see a problem for what it is. Like some people, think first principles thinking, these kind of things. I can break down a problem really, really quickly and see it for what it is, and then imagine in incredibly high fidelity what the solution might look like. And so that is like my superpower, and this is what gives me pleasure. I love to sit with a customer, understand what they're doing, like with great detail, understand the problems, really understand what they're trying to accomplish, and often I can kind of see an opportunity there. And so that's that thing. And so I have a lot of impatience because of that, right? So okay, so that's the superpower. But then it creates all of this chaos and commotion on the other side of that, right? Because there is no strength without like some kind of weakness. And so, the trouble that I have sometimes is it takes a group of people to build a company. It takes a village to create something special, and entrepreneurs in particular sometimes are criticized for being pioneering and crazy and all over the place or whatever. And that type of energy, you need that type of energy. And this is, we talked, before we got on this meeting today or the podcast about immaturity and maturity. And so anyway, I think that's like one of these things that, while I think that is my superpower and that my Weaverism um, is being really quick to make a decision and see things for what they are, and I'm probably the most disciplined and ambitious person most people will ever meet. I'm not to say that I'm super successful necessarily. I got a long way to go in life, um, but I think that's the truth. It comes at a cost, and so anyway,
Yeah. So,
but I'd say that's maybe my Weaver.
your superpower sounds uh, similar to some research I'm doing on dyslexia. I'm just really
Mm.
curious, and we can cut this out of the video if you don't want to answer. But have you ever thought to be tested to see
Oh,
if?
as a kid, I was. So, there's some, back in the 80s and 70s, right? Attention deficit disorder and all that stuff. So I was never diagnosed with anything like that, but I definitely, uh, I definitely am the kind of person that can imagine, again, in high fidelity, every permutation of a potential problem, right? I mean, it's one of my strengths.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to take any kind of pharmaceutical to sort of blunt that, because I think
Oh no.
no. This is kind of an interesting topic because,
Yeah.
like, again, you get into it and you're like, okay, and I talk about this sometimes, elsewhere, but these things that create anxiety and stress on you. It's a lot of times because you're imagining worst case scenarios and you're seeing all these different permutations of things. But on one hand, it would be kind of nice to have some calmer moments.
Yeah.
I have a hectic life, a lot of pressure. I try and do a lot of things. I'm not somebody that likes to sit back and just do one thing. I do lots of things, and I enjoy that. But it also, again, it creates some anxiety and some stress and little moments of depression and all these kind of things. And you have to kind of deal with some of that, frankly. But I wouldn't want to give it up. I
Yeah.
wouldn't give that up, because I think though it's painful sometimes, I think it's one of the reasons I've done well for myself over the years. Right. So anyway.
Well, and in the military, we look for people like you, and what we find is not all the time, but a majority of the time, it's somebody who has these tremendous gifts that are a part of dyslexia that have naturally, the individual has naturally learned how to use those skills to their best advantage.
Yeah.
But when they were younger, they were discouraged that these skills were not the mainstream. They weren't neurotypical. And so I'm actually, like I said, I'm working on my paper or my dissertation at Creighton on this because it's fascinating to me because like you, I can see things almost instantaneously. I can see the very critical path to get there. I see it in living color. I see it in pictures. I can hear it. I can articulate it. I can break down the complex and make it very simple to people. And I can move very quickly. And like you, I get frustrated that others don't see it that way. I'm not going
Yeah.
to say criticize them because they can't keep up because they they teach me the discipline with it to capture it, to put it in ways that others can understand. And so I think that's
Yeah.
interesting. And it's a part of your exceptional emotional intelligence by being self-aware. So probably one of your isms, if I was going to put a label on it, is that you're very self-aware, and you've made that clear to us today. How did you come to that self-awareness?
Mm.
What things taught you that?
Yeah. It's been an interesting journey for me that way. When especially when you're in your 20s and 30s and you have early success, because I was very successful in my 20s, very successful in my 30s, and the cosmos sort of reinforces bad behavior. And it's kind of interesting because until you really get kind of punched in the mouth and knocked down and all that stuff, you don't have a full appreciation for maybe even reality, right? Because success begets success, and there's a little bit of that, and then you assume that things that you're doing are maybe good decisions or whatever, your past history, but that's not always the case. um it wasn't until I actually started building an AI company and the complexity of that, and really working with incredibly talented software developers and mathematicians and um, you know, data nerds and all this kind of stuff. And the complexity of that from an intellectual perspective. I mean, you're talking about very, very complex scientific topics. At the same time, you are in a domain where the expense to build an AI capability is eye-watering. I mean,
Yeah.
the amount of money and capital it takes to train performant, something that matters. And I'm not talking about some rinky-dink thing. I'm talking about actually making, something that's kind of meaningful in the world of software today. It is a non-trivial sum of capital, and so that plus you have like the organizational complexity and all of these other things, and then as a CEO, you got kind of a couple jobs. You got to make sure it's marketable. What market are you focused on? Is it viable? And frankly, you make an assessment, and you don't really know till you're doing it. It's like the Marines say, you bleed in the dirt, right? It's you don't know till you're doing some of it, and that's part of it. There's no. If I ever write a book, it's going to be titled "There Was No Brochure," because nobody tells you, hey, look out for this or that. If they do, just like today, I'm going to give little nuggets, but man, you got to learn by doing. So you have all that complexity, and I think like I actually started struggling a little bit, and I found a gentleman named Ramon Corrales. He actually passed away earlier this year, unfortunately. But I remember talking to him, and I met him through one of my Ironman racing guys, buddies, and he had sold a company, and he was sitting at a restaurant with this guy, and I'm like, who in the world is this guy talking to? This tiny little man, and he was a former monk and all this stuff, and I asked Jason, I'm like, Jason, who was that? He goes, oh, that's my family's coach. I'm like, what are you talking about, coach? Get out of here. You're freaking lame. Who needs a coach? And I ended up sitting down with this guy because I was struggling. I couldn't solve this puzzle, right? There's a little disconnect. I'm this pioneering person. I'm surrounded by all these geniuses, but they were like really, they only believed in like facts and what was there. And that's what software is, right? Especially when you run a really big software organization, the kind of brains you have around you, they're not entrepreneurs' brains. That's not what they are. They're different kinds of people, incredibly bright, very discerning. So anyway, I had this disconnect. And this guy, Ramon, literally, I'm like, all these people, I got major problems. I want to hire you. You go fix them all. That was typical me, right? And all he did is take the mirror and he goes, yeah, okay.
This
I'm going
guy.
to spin the mirror around. I'm going to, basically it's like, it's all you, Brian. You are the problem. And it wasn't until I really appreciated that human beings are just, you're all bringing talent to the equation. My superpower is my superpower, but I was not really appreciating others' superpowers. And I wasn't really seeking, you know, I'm being raw with you. Everybody, all these management nerds and good leaders and all this stuff, do they really understand how people tick? I mean, are they really sitting there at night, really taking notes and thinking about their people, their talent, these geniuses they're surrounded with, and really thinking through and writing out, all right, here's what I think this person's doing. Here's what I think they value. Here's how they make decisions. Here's how they go about making those decisions. Here's what matters to them. Here's what it's going to take for them to move from X to Y. Like, I did that for everybody that worked for me. And until I really took that step and started really, in the same way I might design a product or design a company or some other idea that I had to put the same energy into understanding the people around me. It was a lot of work. It took me years.
Yep.
It took me years to really understand it. And I'm not talking about like BS management, babble speak nonsense. I'm talking about really doing it. And then I had to really become vulnerable as a human. And as an entrepreneur, you're trained not to do that. You're tough, thick-skinned, you can take anything. And I still have that. I'm pretty tough. But I had to be more vulnerable and be open to criticism and create a slightly different environment around me, one that allowed maybe again more criticism, more energy, more entrepreneurial spirit from them. And when I did that, and again, I've done this over the last 10 years, right? And again, it's not an overnight thing. You got to put the time and energy in it, just like anything else, working out, building a business, making money. It's the same or maybe more of an effort. But it's one thing to know, it's another thing to do, and it's a whole other thing to create an environment where the team can win. And I sort of just learned to break it down that way. And I realized I was sometimes the worst element in that equation, and I had to remove myself and like create the conditions for success. And when I insert myself later, I got to do it, very strategically, right? And so that's changed my life, frankly. It changed the way I operate. It's made me happier as a human. I'm way more successful today, financially, spiritually, professionally. As a result, I've got, really, really deep friendships, and I love all the people around me that work with me. It's also, it's moved this from a job to, people say family environment or whatever, but I mean, this is my family. That's an important thing. And anyway, it took all that. It took all that. And I'm a pretty tough nut. I'm a tough nut.
No, those are all the key lessons from all that business babble that you hear, as you put it.
Yeah.
So just to add to an understanding for the audience, scope and complexity, how big is your company? How many people do you have?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we're approaching 100 people today. We're growing really fast. This year's a really big year for us. And again, doing it in Kansas City is something special too, and doing it on our own. I mean, that's the big thing is, we're not growing because of financial investment. We're growing because customers believe in us. And I think that's another aspect of this that I think is pretty special,
And I think it's important for the audience to know that I do federal consulting for others, and you have a tremendous reputation. Your company does, and that you've got your you've got your feet in some very, very well worth the effort kinds of projects. I'm not saying that right. Some pretty meaty, healthy things that we can say in the non-classified arena.
Yeah, I would say, people have asked me that before. I would say we are maybe one of the most strategically valued companies in America.
In Kansas City, which I think is
and really for sure in Kansas City. Yeah, for sure in Kansas City.
All the nuances about security clearances and types of people that you get on your team and where they're located. That's all a huge second podcast. But I'm gonna go back to you. So you've put all this effort in. You've learned to become more self-aware about your strengths and where they're best applied. But in that process of being vulnerable, I'm sure you've found that part of that pie wedge. What's that pie wedge that you don't like to do, that you deliberately have to go find somebody to do it for you who loves to do that? So you take that off your plate and focus on what you like to do. What is that slice of pie that you hate?
Yeah, it's kind of weird because as an entrepreneur and sort of a bootstrappy culture kind of guy, right? I mean, I'm party in the front, business in the back kind of guy, right? So I personally wipe the coffee pot down and all that. We don't have a pot, we have a fancy machine, but I still wipe it down and I do all that stuff. And so I take pride in that a little bit. Even people that work for me inside the company, people that work for me outside the company, I try and take care of them in a big way. So I don't have, I think that's a very dangerous thing, to let that creep in. And so I don't do that. I don't behave that way. But I will tell you, again, as an entrepreneur, I take pride in doing the stuff I don't like to do. I have learned, I found there's a gentleman that I met that is a genius at organizational strategy and call it checklist management and all that kind of stuff. And I tell you what, when you meet somebody that's really a machine like that and a genius, it changes your life that way because it's a force multiplier. And so these are the thing. I'm the kind of guy that has 4,000 unread emails in his inbox. I can go to bed. It's actually probably pretty true. It's pretty close to that number, I guess. I probably have 400 unread text messages. I can go to bed, no problem with that. Some people can't, right? And so that's my compliment. My wife is the opposite of me. This is why I've got this amazing marriage to an amazing woman. But we are polar opposites. And I found, my polar opposite at work, a gentleman that I've worked with for a number of years, that is my 100% compliment. And so I think, it's hard to give those things up or build a system to kind of offload those things. Again, as an entrepreneur, I'm not talking about being a middle manager in a big company where assistants and deputies and all that stuff is kind of the norm. I'm talking about being a part of a pioneering, venture, high growth venture where you've got to have generalists, So anyway, I think, again, my lesson has been to be more disciplined about relying on those people. Once you sort of, again, you've done the work to study them and you understand what makes them tick, what makes them happy, frankly, right? I will not give a task to somebody and dump on them. I don't like delegating. I don't have a personal assistant. It's for that reason. I've never enjoyed having a secretary or personal assistant or anything like that. I manage my own calendar. I'm just that kind of guy. Some people think that's crazy because I certainly, have a lot on my plate, but that's more like an example of, the things I won't give up. But again, I think, for me as an entrepreneur, having a right-hand person that can kind of keep the machine, running and perform that maintenance, I think is invaluable. That's been a gift to me.
Yeah, and I'm 100% with you in that, as organizations, I mean, as you go to 2, 3, 4, 500 people down the road, how to do everything in your company. You may not know the detailed math, that you've got an expert there to do that. Yeah. But as your systems become, when you're putting a full load on your systems, eventually, and again, I know how to
do scale.
You know how to do all the stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a world-class planner, operations guy. You saw the school. We're taught how to do. I could do that all day long, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
So I'd rather.
Well, I own other companies that are larger and more mature. And so those companies are run in a completely different manner. And so I think that's the key, right? I've been fortunate enough to acquire companies or start companies that have been very successful and in very mature markets with much more mature, sort of less complex, although certainly compelling, but less maybe capital intensive investments in terms of technology. And those businesses, you have to, you might be planning 3 years at a time. And that's what's fascinating, like Torch, we work with commercial companies and government customers and all this stuff. And the planning cycles are really interesting and nuanced and varied. And but these other, like I'm thinking of one of the companies I own is a healthcare information and software company, and that company lives and dies by annual, forecasts and quarterly, performance metrics and all that stuff. It isn't, daily, performance metrics. It's big chunky campaign like programs to investment strategies and people strategies and all this stuff, and it's the CEO that runs that company and the entire executive team is amazing because they're built for that. They're in a market that rewards that. And it's kind of funny for me, basically chairman of both companies, it's sort of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Over here at Torch, it's really fascinating, and every day is a little bit different, and then in this other company, you're doing long range forecasting, long range planning. We're not talking about next month. We're talking about 2025, 26 kind of results, how to maximize that. And so and the inputs, I can be a little more I don't even know, more of a swashbuckler and Torch, and there you got to use sort of a scalpel, right, and some tweezers. And it's just an interesting dichotomy for sure.
Well, but you're using that technique. You've got this company over here that requires a different kind of leadership style, and this company, like I was saying, I just want to do the stuff I like. And you didn't even tell
Yeah.
the company. I mean, what we're 30 minutes into the podcast, and now this other company, which you don't, this is your baby. This is your jewel. This is what gets you up in the morning. This is what gets that brain pumping. You ever seen that movie, The Accountant, with Ben Affleck?
Yes.
What part do you like that movie? Just out of curiosity. I've seen
Yeah, I liked him. He had the mini gun out in his window. That was like
Oh,
the cool part.
you went straight to the kinetic. I can watch the scene where he gets into 15 years of records and
Yeah,
starts writing on the wall. I
I
can't.
like that part too. Yeah,
Oh, I get goosebumps because that's, to me, that was
yeah,
like, that's exactly how I would have
yeah.
approached the problem, is writing on the wall and doing
Yeah,
the.
a minigun. I mean,
Yeah.
he got me at minigun. Yeah,
That's kind of
yeah,
scary a little bit. Yeah. Anyway, so.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, good. So self-awareness. So you've hit on so many different topics. I mean, I like you were talking about growth mindset versus a fixed mindset in the world that you're in. So you're the entrepreneur, you're seeing all the dots connected, you're seeing all the potentiality. But then you have all these engineers over here who are a bit more fixed in their mindset. And then in between, you've got that gap. And you've talked
Hmm.
about trying to make sure that the mirror is not pointed at you in that gap, but the mirror should be, eventually pointed at them in that gap. And so
Yeah.
when you have more of a fixed mindset for people who are very A plus B equals C, how do you encourage them, or do you encourage them, I guess, to take some risk, to get out of
Mm.
the box a little bit? I mean, how do you underwrite the risk? Do they see that from you? Do you openly discuss it? Are there issues with that?
Yeah, I think, yes, 100% underwrite it. I underwrite it with, I mean, my own capital. It's, that. So, I'm taking, the biggest risk in creating an environment where they can be successful. I think it's also when you decide that you're going to, unlike a lot of other kinds of businesses that you can get involved in, when you get involved in a software company and you're choosing to partner with these genius software developers and you really want to attract the best and brightest, you've got to commit to creating an environment for them to be successful. And you can't run it, like you might any other kind of department or any other kind of thing. It's really important for us to build an engineering first culture here. You want to build a high tech, truly high tech firm. Like I might have the product ideas and I might have the IP for how to solve the customer's problem, but the how, you've got to give them latitude and you've got to give them a chance to explore and tinker and experiment. Even frankly, when you might not have the money, like unlimited. I mean, no one has unlimited money, right? I mean, but you might not have the biggest balance sheet to go and provide, the ultimate latitude or freedom and flexibility to go and explore, but you got to create some, you got to put up some rails. And I think, one, you've got to create an environment where a software developer will love their job and they like to build things. They like to write code that gets deployed and used by customers. They love to get the feedback from the customers. So when it came to software development, I was really, really inspired. I went on spring break with my kids and they went out and decided to go do something and shopping or whatever. And I read a book. I stayed by the pool and I read a book called Rebel Code. I read this book a long time ago. It was about the birth of open source.
Yeah.
Linux and open source and the Apache Foundation and all the stuff that was going on at Stanford and all that stuff back in the day. And it was an epiphany because the reason open source is so successful is the problem solver and the problem are very intimately connected. In typical corporate America, the problem, the customer,
Yeah.
and the person solving the problem are so, there's all kinds of, like, think Microsoft is the complete opposite. Now they get picked on in the book, right? Because it was Windows versus Linux. But Microsoft puts the maximum number of people between the end user that has the problem and the people creating the product, right? I mean, it's just, I don't get to talk to, when I'm using Microsoft Outlook, I don't get to talk to the developer of Outlook, right? There's a massive disconnect there. Maybe a bad example, but you get the idea of that.
Yeah.
And this notion of open source puts the problem owner and the problem solver as intimately linked as you could possibly get. And so it was this epiphany. And also there was lack of management structure. In open source world, there's no management structure. It's a communal thing, and everybody sort of collaborates on the problems. And I think it's, if you can sort of create a hybrid infrastructure in a company that, I mean, certainly we are building software for profit, right? But you can create an environment, you can create an intimacy where, and you can even treat a little bit of the software this way, where you really understand what to monetize and what not to try and monetize. I think that's a big problem in the industry today, where I think these companies are sort of, sort of extorting clients in some weird way, especially in the data world. But you can create an environment like that creates some magic for your team. And I think there's corollaries out there like the open source models. And if you really study those models and then you decide, how could this impact my business? How could this impact the way I organize teams? And so we have team leaders and we have groups that are around the products, and we have a kind of a decentralized and cellular approach to the way we build our development teams. But it wasn't always the case. We used to have a centralized R&D team. I got rid of that. It was the wrong thing, right? The centralized R&D means no one else gets to think about innovation. I'm going to outsource my innovation to a centralized R&D team. You guys aren't good enough for it, so I don't want you to think about it. This is a big problem in corporate America and startup world too. The more you centralize functions, the more you're sort of saying that I'm not going to harvest the mind or the wisdom of the crowd. And so I sort of took all those lessons when I started building the software companies, and tried to really adopt that kind of infrastructure, that kind of environment, and then give the people the runway they need. Communicate with them every week, tell them, hey, here's what's important to me, here's what's important to the clients, how are you going to solve it, but let them manage themselves, let them manage the backlog, and we try and avoid a bunch of PMO nonsense too, project management office, where they're beating on developers to type faster and all that. It doesn't work. And so I think embracing this decentralized sort of mindset where there's more customer intimacy is the answer to that, frankly.
Wow. Well said. Another whole different podcast on how to pick that.
Yeah, it's a deep topic. I'm sorry. You can't go light or shallow on that topic. It's a tough one.
It would be interesting to pick that one apart. Yeah, well, so here in the last few minutes we have with the audience, I know you're always trying to change the world. You're always out there doing that makes people go, what's he doing now? And if people haven't Googled you yet, they sure will after this, and look at some of the things you've done and are doing. So what's next, Brian Weaver? Where is that brain of yours taking you?
Yeah, I think life is a journey. Everything I've ever done has been that way, right? And so I sort of embrace these things that come to me. Although I do have a little more discipline. So when I have ideas, I write them down. I don't just start executing against them. And the ones that survive, I invest in.
You write it on paper?
Oh, I have notebook, Post-it notes, and then I have phone. I have, I have different tools for different needs.
I just want the younger audience to see that the CEO of an AI company uses paper.
There's something when you commit to the physical act of writing a note. There's something that is different about your brain, doodling. I mean, I believe in that. So, frankly, I've been on this journey, and what I've learned that our country could benefit from a lot of the assets that we have in the Kansas City region. Mm-hmm. And so when I have been inspired to sort of use what I've learned to help other companies. I try and do that. I'm helping a couple companies in the defense space now kind of win contracts and understand how to navigate and meet people. And I really get a lot of pleasure out of, I don't want to call myself a mentor of those companies or anything, but I just try and, you're just trying to be a collaborator. You're trying to help them. You've learned some lessons. You want to help them avoid some of the disasters you may have experienced, right? But at the same time, being in that arena, and seeing the value of what a good work ethic these Kansas City technologists have, the diversity of skill set and experience they have. I mean, Kansas City is unique because I can walk down any neighborhood of Kansas City and I can bump into a software nerd that knows how to process a bunch of stuff from like healthcare records, like Cerner, right? And all the spinoffs and little cubs of Cerner that those things have created. I've got T-Mobile and Sprint. So I've got mobility and mobile technology. I've got IoT devices like Garmin. You think of marketing technology. Kansas City's got is home of the largest digital ad agency in the world, VML. I mean, they're so big they bought the downtown airport and turned it into an office. Amazing company. But for decades, this town has been on the forefront of all these kind of technologies and industries, logistics, intermodal, aviation. So you have all this stuff going on here. And I think we're like one of the only cities in America that has that sort of tapestry of talent in one place.
Yeah.
And so then when we go and I take these people, and a lot of them work here, I have a whole big interesting cross section of people that work here. And I've been inspired to sort of help sell Kansas City to a lot of these big government customers. So then when you look at the US federal government, in particular, defense, Kansas City and Kansas in particular is 32% below the national average for DoD spending. Kansas City only receives, 0.2% of DoD contract revenue. And so when you look at it, we are this amazing market with amazing talent. And it's this untapped resource, I think, for national security. And so I'm really, have dedicated almost the rest of my life, frankly, because I'm running out. Again, you're gonna make fun of me because I think of myself as old, but I'm not really that old yet, but I'm getting there. But I've got a couple decades left of my life, 20, 30 years left of good time to invest. And I feel like that's what I really want to dedicate myself to, is trying to, create another hub for defense and national security innovation in the Kansas City region. Because I think there's a problem that I've identified, that's an opportunity from a marketplace perspective. The workforce here is amazing. They love it. They're patriots. They work hard, putting in a 50, 60-hour week. That ain't a thing, and they love doing it. And so I think I've been inspired. I think Torch.AI is a bit of a catalyst here. The fact that, we've proven that you can build an AI company that supports these kind of very sophisticated and discerning customers. I think we've proven that it can be done. And I think, especially with the expectation of how much we've been growing and will grow over the next 5 years or so, I think it's something special. So I'm really excited to try and invest there, try and put more energy and attention there. And there's some things I hope to announce over the next 6 to 9 months that'll be special for Kansas City, to create more of a catalyst to take advantage of that opportunity for certainly our country and hopefully the population here.
Well, absolutely. And I'll tell you, we'll be looking forward to that. That's very interesting. I appreciate you sharing all that with us. Okay. Well, anything else you want to add, sir, before we?
No, this has been fun. I always appreciate an opportunity to, share a little bit about, my war stories and all that. And again, if anybody's, that's listening, is curious or, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm there. I try and get on there at least once a week. But again, happy to support you, happy to answer questions, happy to help in any way I possibly can. I think that's kind of part of giving back and taking care of others. And again, just thanks for having me on today, and I look forward to trying to help out your audience, and just thanks for supporting me. Yeah.
Appreciate it. And we all know that if we send you a note on LinkedIn, you'll actually be the one answering it. So
it is me. I do not let the marketing team mess with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. We really appreciate your time. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, sir.